From Holy Trinity Church in Inwood, New York City, welcome to Inwood Artworks On Air. It's where we meet musicians, filmmakers, writers, theater makers, and artists of all stripes who make their home what we affectionately call Upstate Manhattan. I'm your host, Aaron Sims, and today we welcome visual artist Jeanne F. Jalandoni. Jeanne is a painter and textile artist born and based in New York City. Her practice involves personal research and relating family stories to historic Filipino American archives in order to draw out a mythological narrative that traces the complexities of inheriting two cultures. She received her BFA in studio art from New York University and has set solo shows with Taymour Grahne Projects, Real Artways, the Little Underground Gallery, and the Berkshire Art Museum. She has exhibited in various group shows, and in 2019, she curated Cultural Cousins, a show of Filipinx and Latinx artists for Chishama here in New York. In addition, Jeanne was an artist in residence at 36 Chase and Barnes Residency, the Textile Arts Center, and Cha North Arts Residency. She has been awarded the 2019 Real Art Award and is a past recipient of the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council Creative Engagement Grant. We are thrilled to have her here today and talk about her work. But first, let me welcome you, Jeanne, to Inwood Artworks On Air. It's so great to have you here.
Hi, Aaron. Thank you so much. It's so great to be here.
And the commute was okay, right?
Yeah, so easy. Just a few blocks away.
So how are you? What's going on?
I'm good. Well, this summer is actually the first time I'm having a vacation for myself. And after like 3 years of nonstop work. So I'm a little bit like, what do people do for fun? Or what do I do for fun? But it's been great catching up with like friends and family and, you know, like generating ideas in a non-aggressive way. So
how does one generate ideas aggressively?
It's just like, let me grab bugs and like find something, sketch something really quickly.
Well, I'm glad you're taking time for yourself because it's important to draw from life, and remember, you are a person too outside of your art.
Yeah.
You know, I listened. I know I'm preaching to the choir. Yeah, I'm guilty as charged. The same thing, but well, it's great. You talk about who you are as a person and all that, and I'd like to start off talking about that, and because it is reflective in your work. I think I'm a big admirer of your work from a long time, and when you joined our group show and we had it at the pop-up gallery, we did I think in 2018, I think or so,
Yeah.
and so it was great to be introduced to your work through that. So your work largely reflects on Filipino history and your personal experiences as a second-generation American. Can you share a little bit how you use your work as a vehicle to explore your identity within these cultures?
Yeah. Well, I guess for me personally, my family were really big on family stories, where our ancestors came from. So as a second generation, I've never been to the Philippines. So as a child, I remember I would ask my mom for bedtime stories, and she'd be like, "Once upon a time in the Philippines," and then just start telling like her family stories. And I'm just like, wow, this sounds so magical. And I wanted to add visuals to that in some way. But, you know, for a really long time, I didn't care to like tell people I was Filipino or talk about those stories, you know, because it's family stories. But it wasn't until I guess I just started meeting other Asian Americans who felt similarly like they didn't see themselves in media or movies, and thinking that like a small thing like, for example, spam can mean so much to a Filipino person, and it could also mean different things, you know, across the world. Like I had a friend, I was doing a residency in North Adams, Massachusetts, and he was from Georgia. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna make spam. This is like a luxury for Filipinos. And he was like, that's so funny because in Georgia, it's like for poor people. So it just got me thinking a lot about, you know, what do objects mean to people, and that however you, whatever value you associate with something, it's completely different from what another person can value it as. So I just started like, you know, giving myself these exercises of like drawing spam or like drawing myself, and then putting it out in public and then seeing the kind of responses I would get. And that would inspire me to say, like, okay, like, we have to have a bigger discussion about this. Let's push it further. And that's when I started subtly indicating family stories in there. And I would get emotional making these pieces too. So it also meant something for me to bring those pieces out. And then also, like, the political environment adds to it too. So.
Well, I was going to say, it's like, yes, the answer all the above. Yes. And I would say, as finding those representations within the different cultures, particularly Filipino culture, finding, and I'll mention one figure that I feel like predominantly shows up in a lot of your work, the caribou figure.
The carabao,
Sorry, carabao, excuse me. Caribou is something else. Sorry. Figures prominently in many of your works. And I feel like, there's, when you're asking those questions by exploring the spam and things like that, and there's just things that come up and comparing it to, like, time and transcendence and, even the afterlife and our own mortality. So I was just curious if, like, it's how one spends one's time largely on your mind when you're working on things like that.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I can think that it seems that way.
Right. Yeah. And so my dad, he's a photographer, and I also think about time in, like, my own lifetime.
Yeah.
Time is fleeting. Recently, I've had a few relatives pass away who are very significant in my life. Thank you.
Me too.
And then you start thinking about how you spend your life and what's important to you. But also, doing personal research on the Philippines or U.S.-Filipino relations, that's also kind of like time travel in itself. So suddenly, like, I've just been thinking about the compilation of all these things as, like, layers of my identity. And I choose to, like, reflect that in my artwork through, like, textiles and painting, and also, like, working with layers in those ways.
Well, there's so many layers in your work. And I was going to say, there's two roads I can pick to go here. And I think I'm going to go the road of staying with your work as a whole. Then we'll talk about textiles. I enjoy the fact that you use and incorporate representations. You speak of your family, like personal items, into these larger works of time and all, and who we are as a culture and where we're going. Like you said, and finding, and like by say you reach into that historical, like you marry your family with that historical past. I think it's really interesting to see pieces of, like, I think I remember seeing one of your pieces that had, like, a sweater from, like, your grandmother in or something like that, or a piece or a weave of some kind, representational of that. And so I love the fact that you use items from your family's personal past or your past to help incorporate and tell those stories, and also put a little bit of a spotlight on those, little magnifying glass of talking about that culture and that piece of time and how it relates to who we are today and watching it. So do you use those images as a point of departure for a piece, or do you incorporate them along the way in creating the work, those little personal touches from you and your family?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's a little bit of both. I think I'm very spontaneous about it because, again, it's kind of like picking and choosing, like, what to tell people or, like, reveal to people, because it is vulnerable. It's like,
sure, it's incredibly. It's like, this is me. Right. It's as vulnerable as a self-portrait. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, exactly. But for example, I guess in a number of pieces, I've used the duster, which is like a house dress, a very simple house dress, and it usually just had all these corny patterns on it, like tropical flowers, or I had one as a kid where it was like maps of the Philippines. But those were my souvenirs that my relatives in the Philippines would send to me as a kid. We also have something in Filipino culture called the balikbayan box, which is...
Tell me about this. I don't know.
Yeah. So basically, Filipinos who migrated to America, if they still have family and friends, like, back at home, they would pack this giant, like, care package for them, just because, you're more well off. And so it'd be random things like Colgate toothpaste and, like, Spam and clothes, just like anything. And I mean, my mom still does this maybe like once a year, and she would label what objects are for who back in the Philippines. And then I need to like double check my research on this, but I'm pretty sure that like the Filipino government has like a flat rate for the box. So it could be like like a standard size, but you could like fit as many things as you want in there.
Cool.
And then, yeah, it just goes back home and then it's a care package. So my relatives, they would in return send some souvenirs from the Philippines. So dusters was one of them. And so some of my characters in my paintings would wear those garments. And like it doesn't matter to me if other people who view my work respond to that or not. It's, it's more personal for me. It's important
to you, though.
Right.
It grounds the piece for you, right?
Exactly, yeah. Like this is just a part of like the identity of being Filipino American. You get like these cute trinkets from them.
Well, it's funny you mention that because like I always love talking about process with artists, and it always gives a little insight to people's work. And so I always appreciate too. We won't talk about it now as you want to about like when a piece is actually finished or is it ever finished, depending on who you are. And it's like, but like pleasing oneself as an artist, that's how it's finished when you're happy with it,
right?
And or you'll stop working on it when you're pleased. And so I love the fact that you have these things and you incorporate them, and that is to you representational of what you're trying to accomplish, and it hits home for you, literally.
Yeah.
Well, as you said earlier, you work in both paint and textiles. Which leads me to ask how you developed your craft using these in tandem as mediums, because you literally weave or knit and or paint your own narratives. It's because your work has such beautiful texture to it.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, it's funny because in college, so I went to New York University for studio art. I was experimenting a lot with abstract expressionism, painting a lot of landscapes, and I had a painting teacher who would challenge us to, well, he said, first make your canvas, like make your own, like stretch your canvas, learn the process. And through doing that, I was like, oh, canvas is fabric, and it was just kind of like, okay, well, what else can I paint on? So I started painting on different fabrics. And we have a sewing machine at home, so I just wanted to learn how to use that and started sewing fabrics together, realizing canvas is really like, there's a reason why we paint on canvas, like it's very sturdy, it holds paint well. So I've just been experimenting from then on, and like seeing where it takes me. And early on when I was only combining pre-made fabrics with canvas, I had a lot of feedback from people saying, well, have you ever made your own fabric? And I was like, yeah, maybe I should try doing that.
Yeah.
And then when the lockdown happened, it was kind of a perfect opportunity for me to experiment without a huge spotlight on my career. So I started learning how to tapestry weave. I had an old like canvas stretcher bar that I like hammered nails into, and then I just started making like warp and weft on it, and then I did the Textile Art Center, which was a 9-month intense residency that taught you how to weave, especially like on a floor loom and use a knitting machine, and it just opened a whole new world for me. I was like, wow, you could really manipulate structures, and I'm already manipulating structures in my own narrative and work, so it just made sense to use both mediums for me. But I mean, I will admit, I still don't know what I'm doing. Like, I don't know. I always think about like the longevity of my work, and I'm like, this thing is gonna totally collapse in
20 years tops.
Exactly, yeah. So, I mean, it's a learning experience, and I think that's what makes my career really fun for me as well. Like you never know what's gonna happen.
That should be the title of your autobiography. You never know what's gonna happen.
Yeah, exactly.
I love that. Thank you so much for that honest description and that kind of like really concise chronological timeline of your evolution, because it's so it makes sense the work you do. It has that quality of so that wonderful textural tapestral collage of materials, and you include canvas, and you can sew weavings that might include rope or resin and prints, or God knows other materials you're going to put in that thing. That's, I think it's really wonderful that you kind of have your way, and then the warp and weft, so to speak, and you have your own loom, right?
Yeah.
And so putting that all together, it's like you're creating that foundation for the work already, and there's something to be said about how the process happens, where you're by doing one thing and creating, like, you're literally creating the foundation for what else you're building on it. And I think you don't get that by stretching a canvas sometimes.
Right. And I think also, like, with fabric and textiles, everyone relates to that. Like, we all wear clothes, we all use towels, and it's very common for us. And I mean, one of my favorite facts is that textiles was the main currency before coin currency. So there is this underlying value to it, and I guess I'm trying to bring that back.
I was going to trade you my shirt after the show for one of your pieces, if you don't mind. I hope you're okay with that. Wampum. Here you go. Train, bargain.
I mean, I'm all for bartering systems.
Hey, as an artist, sometimes you literally give the shirt off your back to somebody else. But that's true. That's true. It was the way we did business here in Manhattan, where we'll just mention we were talking about earlier before the podcast that she would give tours to people up here. This is where the Dutch bought from the Indians for a couple beads and trinkets and whatever else, the trading. But speaking of, I want to mention that you do make your home here in Northern Manhattan, and you create here in Northern Manhattan, and I've always enjoyed visiting your studio over at Cornerstone Studios. There on Bennett Avenue. You have a lot going on in there. It's a big space, and it's like, I don't know how quite to describe it. There's multiple projects happening at one time, or some finished, some just iterating just sketches. There's a lot of different things going on. How incredible is that to have like a space away from your home you can go to create work?
Oh, it's awesome. I mean, I used to make work in my bedroom.
Yeah, well, start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it just happened that I needed a space, and Cornerstone had an open studio. But I don't think any artist had that studio before me. It was newly renovated.
Right.
And when I moved in, I was sharing it for a few years. And then slowly I was like I said to Jeff, the manager, I was like, can I like just expand? Can I take over the whole room? And he was like, yeah, no problem. And I was like, oh, thank goodness. And then I could just like stretch things on the floor and, like fart around in the studio. You don't have to worry about like other people.
But it's good to have that kind of like safety blanket, right? It's akin to what was your dad like when he came home and say was your room a mess, or was it clean when you were a kid?
Oh, like I don't even let him say anything.
See, exactly. I have a younger sister. It was the same way, and my dad would not be allowed in my sister's room due to which way it looked.
Yeah.
But there's a comfort in that now.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's good to have privacy and like be able to like hear your own voice.
Yeah.
And I think Washington Heights, Inwood, like it really provides that. Yeah. When people give me studio visits, they're like, I didn't know like studios exist up here, or like you could actually hear yourself think.
Yeah.
And I'm really grateful for it. It's a huge privilege for me.
Well, thanks for bringing that up. It's because I always get questions about artists. I don't know. They're on the fence of, should I stay in my bedroom, my apartment, or should I get my own space? And I think that's a question people have. And because obviously there's a financial consideration as well.
I think you also just need to have like full discipline or like a really intense level of discipline to do that, because for me specifically, like I want to keep my bedroom just for rest and sleep, and then all the stress and my ideas, in the studio. But I mean, there's also just some days where I don't feel like working, but I just have to go to the studio just to remind myself that there are things going on. And then I'll just like be on my phone for like an hour and be like, okay, I'm gonna leave.
Well, it's good. Again, Remember, you are a person too, outside of your art, very much so. Well, has our neighborhood influenced your art in any way? Has it found its way into your art? I mean, I know
Ooh, yeah,
because
that's
that
a
would
good
go to the other
question.
side about you
Yeah.
as the American side.
Oh, totally. So I feel like you see a lot of Fort Tryon in some of my work. I mean, if you look at it, you probably can't tell, but a lot of the like flora and nature, it's usually inspired by the gardens in Fort Tryon. Growing up, like me and my family, like we would always take Sunday walks through that park. And the cloisters is like a huge influence as well. I think early in like 2016, 2017, I would include like the Little Red Lighthouse, like all the way in the distance of like a painting. So you just see like a red dot. And for me, I'm like, that's the Little Red Lighthouse.
Again, you know it's there. It's all that matters.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that's great. I love it. And I understand you're currently part of a group show right now. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yes. So I'm in a show right now at Pace University Art Gallery. It's called To Be Made Whole, curated by Sarah Cunningham and Francisco Meldondo. And that show, I forget how many artists are in it.
Not a quiz. It's okay.
Yeah. So there's about like 8 artists, I want to say. And the show will be up until September 14th. It's a painting and textile show, which is really exciting because I'm not familiar with too many artists who do the same medium that I do. And I have 2 pieces in that show, and I think you should all go see it.
All right. And it runs through, I believe, till September 14th here,
Yes,
right?
correct.
And it's called To Be Made Whole.
Yes.
Excellent. Very good. Well, Jeannie, it's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. This has been really fun.
Yeah, it sure has been. Before we say goodbye, where can we send people to find more about your work?
Yeah, so you can go to my website, JeanneJalandoni.com, or my Instagram, which is JFJ. Whoa, hold on. JFJalandoni.art. There we go.
She doesn't Instagram herself very often, folks. Cut her some slack, all right?
Thank you so much.
You bet. Yeah. Thanks again for joining me on this Artist Spotlight episode of Inwood Artworks On Air. It's where I meet the musicians, filmmakers, theater makers, and visual artists of all stripes that make their home here in northern Manhattan. If you have a moment, please show some love right now by rating and reviewing this podcast on Apple Podcasts. It really does help. Many thanks to Holy Trinity here for hosting us and to HideSites.com for uptown promotional support. You can support On Air and all of our programming by making a tax-free donation to Inwood Artworks on inwood.artworks.nyc/donate or via Venmo at Inwood Artworks. Be sure to follow us on social media to keep up all that we do, which includes the Inwood Film Festival, Filmmakers Al Fresco, live performances, and so much more. We're very proud that Inwood Artworks is supported in part by public funds, the New York State Department of Cultural Affairs, in partnership with the City Council. And our programming is made possible by the New York State Council on the Arts with the support of the office and the governor and the New York State Legislature. From the top of Manhattan and the bottom of our hearts, thank you so much for tuning in. This is Aaron Sims for Inwood Artworks On Air.